In my practice, I get to meet a lot of great leaders, and I've got two of them on the show for you today. I wanted to talk about some of the cultural problems we're seeing this year, and to get a leadership bent on why they're happening and how we could potentially solve them. So it's my pleasure to bring to you today two people that I'm lucky to call friends. Both of them are partner-level executives and respected experts in their fields. Please welcome to the show Sofia Theodorou and Carl Oxholm, as we talk about everything from the growing divide between employees and employers to the recession and wellness at work. Enjoy.
Greetings, team. Welcome to the Badass Agile podcast. I'm your host, Chris Williams.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to another episode of the Badass Agile podcast. As you know, I don't do interviews unless the people that I'm bringing on are people that I know personally, and I know they're going to add massive value. There's some topics that I've been burning to address lately, and I can't do them by myself. I need to bring in the best. So I'd like to welcome two people that I met during my time at one of the world's largest accounting and services firms. Let me introduce to you Sofia Theodorou, who is a human capital professional, executive, people person, transformation expert, future of work expert. There's so many things in your LinkedIn profile. I didn't know which one you wanted to be identified with, but welcome, Sofia.
Thank you, Chris.
And then my good friend who's been on the show before, Mr. Carl Oxholm, who is a tax professional, an ex-partner, and he's an upcoming author and one of my favorite people because he is so great. And maybe, Carl, I should let you introduce what your specialty is, but I came to know you as an expert in emotional intelligence. But welcome, first of all.
Thanks, Chris. Awesome to be here with you and Sofia. Real pleasure.
This is going to be fun. This is going to shake stuff up because these are two people whose voices I respect so much, not because of how they do their jobs professionally, but how they communicate and how they are. They're inspiring to me. I always learn so much when I'm working with them. This is going to be a great conversation. So, Sofia, just give us a tiny bit of background on what you do and what you love.
I have been a chief people officer across various industries in recent years, and I'm passionate about the people equation, really, truly understanding people and what they need to flourish in organizations. And that's put me on the track of understanding and architecting the future of work in a way that completely encompasses human emotional, psychological needs so they can thrive.
Thank you for that. That's a beautiful statement. Carl, I'm going to switch over to you. What about you? What do you do? What do you love?
Yeah, so I founded an organization called Virtue Compass Inc. a couple of years ago. I'm the CEO of that organization, and I absolutely love helping people not only discover their best, but to get excited about offering their best in service of something that really matters to them. So that usually entails how is it that we can go about optimizing, let's just say, the quality, the focus, and the expression of our energy, and put it into good use as it relates to something meaningful and of service to the world. So super excited about leadership as a skill in contrast to, let's say, management and administration.
That's awesome. One of the things that I'll say about you that you won't say about yourselves is that when I mention either of your names to people that know us all, they're unabashed in their appreciation and respect for not only what you do, but how you do it. And so that's why your voices are so important. Now, the topic for today, or the topics for today, are going to revolve around the fact that I think in 2023, first of all, Sofia, a lot of the bigger problems have kind of fallen in your lap. When you think about remote work, when you think about quiet quitting, when you think about great resignation, when you think about culture problems, when you think about employee-employer divide, all of those things touch your area of expertise. And so the world is looking for input and waiting for guidance on the right way forward. How do we handle these problems? And then, Carl, there's always the element of people and their energy and their passion and becoming their best selves that play into it as well. So there's two or three different angles from which we can approach these problems. So I'm going to address those things that are most relevant in 2023. We're starting a new year. So the question is, what are the changes and trends that we're seeing right now, first of all? Because I believe that the world's in a little bit of crisis. I don't think we're very good at being very good to one another. And that's starting to bubble up in the workplaces. And so what are the changes and trends that you see that are affecting organizations, the workforce itself, but most importantly, our ability to be effective and happy and fulfilled at work? I'm going to start with you, Sofia.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I think, the last 18 months were really marked by, I think it's been called the great revision of how, when, why, and where we work. And we've experienced a burst of new technologies that improve collaboration, communication, and administration. And I think what we're seeing now, what we're battling is inflation, an economic slowdown, geopolitical turmoil. We're seeing baby boomers leaving the workforce. And organizations are being forced to transform and reinvent themselves. Now, let's face it, people and employees are at the heart of any business transformation. But speaking of employees, one thing that hasn't changed much is the state of employee engagement globally, which continues to be low and is now coupled with employee stress being at an all-time high. And I don't think it's surprising that over the last year and still today, we're seeing workers changing jobs seemingly as easy as they change laptops. Organizations continue to report seeing higher turnover than they've seen in decades. And I believe this is an indicator that leaders are still struggling to address issues in workplace culture. We've seen in past decades organizations being consumed with creating an exceptional customer experience. And this is still an important focus point. After all, business is there to serve customers, but the current workforce trends and climate, I think we're going to see a pivot in focus towards creating a more supportive and human employee experience. Many organizations that have been obsessed with the customer experience lost sight of the fact that their employees who serve their clients weren't having a great experience. And there's a symbiotic relationship between the customer and the employee experience. What we're seeing is that employees are becoming a lot more like customers. For example, when you take an option away in a work environment, they're willing to vote with their feet. We need to shift our perspective to employees as consumers who are looking at companies from the perspective of the work being offered as a product and the value of the product side features, elements such as flexibility, purpose, opportunity to learn and grow, etc. And I think some companies have struggled to reimagine and invest in a more human experience at work. And I believe this will pose a significant threat with the competition that will continue for skilled talent.
That's a great answer. I'm going to ask Carl to add some flavor to that by asking you, why is this so hard for us, Carl? Because everything that Sofia just said makes perfect sense. And we can probably even imagine some solutions. We can certainly get behind a vision for doing better. And anyone can say, well, we're going to do better. We're going to do right by our people. And yet, we don't seem to. So, Carl, I'd love for you to weigh in and tell us why that might be.
I always find it fascinating. Here we are as human beings who, go figure, want to actually have a human experience. It's funny. And the reason I say that is to your point, Chris, and to the wonderful insights that Sofia provided. Here we are, culturally speaking, with a very much defined outside-in way of seeing ourselves. So many people, many among us have been convinced that we either are what we have or we are what we do. And of course, we're neither of those things. We are who we are. We're this unique amalgam of experience that wants to make itself available in service of a need that really matters to us. And I think on the back end of COVID, you had an awful lot of individuals having a little more alone time, let's call it that, and sitting back and asking themselves, why is it that I'm doing what I'm doing? And how do I feel about the why of what I'm doing? And as they started to ask themselves these questions, all of the points that Sofia just eloquently itemized became clearer, let's just say. And so they wanted to be more on purpose with purpose. And when the organizations perhaps that they found themselves a part of were not really walking the talk in terms of delivering on the very mission that they said they hold so near and dear, that inconsistency became, let's just say, more obvious to them. And as a result of that, they stood back and asked themselves, so let's just be starting with ourselves, which of course is the only individual you can really control when all is said and done. If I'm going to be honest with myself, do I really think that we as a collective are delivering and making choices that align with our mission? Or put another way, do I think that I, along with my colleagues, are intentionally role modeling the best of our values, putting them in action in a way that actually is emblematic of who we are at our best? And many people started to find the answer was no. I either don't feel that we're aligned and making decisions aligned with the purpose that we've expressed to the marketplace, or the values, the experience, the behaviors that I'm experiencing, that I'm on the receiving end of, are not at all aligned with the kind of experience that I would have expected of a group that is actually more conscious of living those values. And so again, to Sophia's point, if we want to be engaged, which of course we do, the cause side of that really distills down to the quality of the experience that we co-create with one another. And if that experience doesn't align or resonate with the values that are being espoused, then I find that incongruency, that disconnect, that misalignment to be something that I'm not as patient to be a part of. And so sure, I can do my part as an individual to make it better, but if those in my company aren't interested in doing the same, then perhaps, again, as Sophia suggested, I might talk with my feet. And so back to, if you say that this is why we do what we do, I want the leaders among us to make sure they role model in kind.
Well put. And I gathered something or collected something from what both of you said. Where are we going to try to go? How can we set up something visionary? What do we want to see the future look like? Because as leaders, we have the ability to set that tone. We have the ability to set that vision. And we'll talk about the problems and challenges in a moment, I'm sure. But starting with the idea that we can either get better dealing with or handling our culture and our people and the way we treat them, and the way we actualize them. We can do that because it's the right thing to do. We can do that because it's important to us as leaders. We can do that because it's important to us as a company, usually because we think it's important to our customers. So one of the things I'm interested in your take is, how do we disambiguate or distinguish the right way to set up our vision, our intention, but also the way we communicate and the way we reinforce and reward the right behaviors? See, it's one thing to stand up and say we care, but one of the things you and I know and talk about a lot, Carl, is that vision is one thing, but putting it into action is completely different. So I'd like for you to describe in a short few sentences, what could a potential future look like? And how do we think about the reason so that we can make this real on the ground for people? How can we make this really hit home for everyone in the organization, not just the leaders?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So here's what I would say. What jumps to mind is some of the work that Martin Seligman did around positive psychology. And so from a scientific standpoint, he and his broader team decided, let's look at some of the attributes necessary for a flourishing environment and obviously a flourishing individual as a result of that, and how they both really contribute one to the other. So individually, when you're healthy at home, you have that much more to give vis-a-vis your capacity and your ability to access the best of your capabilities. And of course, the more you do that and spend time with others who are intentional in that regard, the greater the environment, the psychological safety, et cetera. So he talks about PERMA. It's not really an acronym per se, it's a series of letters, but the P stands for positive emotion. So I would ask your listeners, as you listen to these various attributes that Martin pulled to the surface and said, if you want to flourish, then you do need to be more intentional about how positive your emotions are. The E then stands for engagement. So are you actually engaged? Are you curious? Are you interested in the work that you're doing? And if you're not, then there are consequences to that. The R relates to relationships. You know, if we are the company we keep, or to be mindful of the company we keep, then on a day in, day out basis, are you celebrated and positively reinforced for the wonderful things that you bring to the equation? So those are some of the things that you want to look at. Then the M stands for meaning. So again, back to, are you on purpose with purpose? What is it that you're doing? Why are you doing it? How do you feel about the why of what you're doing? These are really great questions to ask ourselves. And then the A stands for achievement. We're born to want to develop, to grow, to expand. So not only would I ask your audience members to think about, so how are you on that spectrum? Do you find that you are positively charged more often than not in terms of a can-do possibility orientation? Do you feel engaged or not? And if not, why not? And what are some of the choices you can make to allow it to be a more engaging environment? And so it goes. Walk your way through each one of those variables. And lastly, I would just sort of end with what you started with, which is not only individually within your own circle of influence, but organizationally in the place that you show up to serve and provide your services to. Do you find more often than not that we are positively reinforcing the behaviors we want to see more of? What we focus on grows. And what I find is we might say all these wonderful things and we might pronounce and espouse certain values, but it's rarer still to see an organization that is practiced in celebrating, recognizing, and rewarding people for the very behavior we want to see more of. Those behaviors that literally align with bringing the best of your values into play. And so I would say start there, start with yourself, and then see how you can create the kind of environment that is conducive to feeling inspired and hopefully inspiring others along the way. Last thought from me, culture is just habit. So the behavioral norms of not only the team that you get to be a part of, but obviously the things that you put into practice. And so start with yourself and see if you can't positively infect accordingly.
I like positively infect. I always say that if you start an interesting fire, something that captures people's imagination and attention, the right people will join forces with you and things spread more organically. So this is where I'm going to come back to Sofia. Sofia, what do you think in terms of how to create a future where people are more fulfilled, where they feel more trust, they flourish, as Carl said? But also, let me ask you this question, because I want the world to hear a human resources / human capital executive say, we care. We know there's a problem. We understand that things are in flux. We understand that it's hard. We know that people are suffering. We know that people are burning out. And we want to do better. So we're not just about policy setting. We're not just about hiring. And we're not just about what you traditionally think of. We're in the business of caring about people. So at the same time that you answer the how, I'd love for you to give fellow executives and leaders some advice on why. Why is this valuable or worthwhile to an employer?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course we're all dancing around the $1 million question, right? And I would say that there's no one size fits all answers because, companies and cultures do vary. And I'd probably start by saying that professional relationships are like personal relationships. We can only expect an employee to stay with an organization for as long as the relationship is beneficial for both parties. And that organizations need to really look deeper into their people analytics to understand employee needs and behaviors. However, I would emphasize that there are some universal principles, and I think Carl very eloquently, talked about PERMA, that are worthwhile from the organizational perspective to reflect on, to consider whether these are set up to ensure that your people can flourish. So, humans have emotional, psychological, and cognitive needs, and research shows that humans thrive in a community that delivers 4 things. And Carl has spoken to some of these things already. Challenging work. Your work has to be meaningful and fulfilling. You need to feel empowered and have a sense of agency over it. You need clarity on what's expected of you, and your work should make good use of your skills. It should serve a higher purpose. In other words, you need to feel that you're doing something that matters and that your work is making a difference. Supportive relationships, which are just so key. This is about being in a work environment where teaming and collaborating with a diverse group of people is a place where you feel like you belong. In other words, you feel seen and validated by others. And by the way, this is a basic human need. Its basis is evolutionary. If your tribe didn't see you, there was a risk you'd be left behind. And when the nomadic life of early humans dictated a need to move, being alone equated to death. You want to feel heard and accepted for who you are, which is about creating that environment of psychological safety that Carl was talking about, that allows you to fully express who you are without judgment, where it's okay to make mistakes and to learn from them. But you want to feel cared for. It makes a huge difference when you feel your whole well-being is an important consideration to your employer. So when these elements are present in your relationships, you feel respected and have a higher degree of trust within your work group and within your organization. Obviously, meaningful rewards, growth, and recognition. Carl talked about that. We all want to be paid fairly. We all want to feel valued, and we want to grow our skills. All of these things help build our self-worth. And lastly, I would just add that an organization's social actions are a key factor in employee engagement and competitive advantage. Taking actions that positively contribute to social and environmental causes increases employee engagement by 20%, according to a recent Gartner study. And we're really starting to see more desire for work with purpose. That is continuing to increase.
Well said. The most important thing that you said in there is something that I truly believe, because I'm obsessed with people who know how to rivet a room and lead people. The most important factor in creating trust and connection with people is really quite simple. People want to feel beautiful. And feeling beautiful is not talking about your physical appearance. It's talking about the beauty of your existence, your passion, your fears, your experience, and just letting people know that they're heard and that they matter enough to listen is so critically important. And I'm willing to bet 90% of the people that we consider leaders by title probably miss that point. I do want to tag you on the second half of the question, which I'm not sure 100% that we got to, which was why. See, we live in a time where microphones and cameras are always on. If you don't do this properly, people will not only vote with their feet, they're going to tell their friends, and they're going to do it in a public way. And those experiences that they share eventually, now in an age where everyone's such democracy of voice we have, everyone has the chance to tell their story. They're going to be telling stories about you as a leader. And so individuals have so much incredible power to make change. And that's why that social accountability is so important. But I would say that an employer must not do the right thing because of the threat of being caught doing the wrong thing. They must do the right thing because they finally understand the value of that culture and the people that compose it. So the question to you, Sofia, before we switch back to Carl, was what are the real benefits to employers? I believe the first people to get this right win. In every sense of the word win. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just touch on 3 areas that drive the business case for this. The first one is just attracting and retaining talent, right? Skills continuing to evolve so quickly. The labor shortage, the competition for skilled talent will continue. You now have Gen Z gaining ground in the workforce. They are your soon-to-be workforce. And guess what? They expect inclusive workplaces, flexibility, support for well-being, and that their organization is making a positive impact on environment and community. And just to reinforce this, they don't see these as perks. These are expectations that they have as a generation. Then we go to profitability, and the numbers just don't lie. Cultures that support the whole person with meaningful work, deep connections, clarity, purpose, all of the things we've been talking about will drive attraction, retention, and engagement of their people. We know from many reputable studies from organizations such as Gallup that highly engaged workplaces see an average 21% jump in productivity, 26% lower absenteeism, 38% lower turnover, and 20% increase in sales. And then finally, the last area I'll touch upon is sustainable and ethical business practices. We are starting to see stakeholders and consumers demand more of companies than they ever did before. They want to see proof of sustainable and ethical people and business practices. And initially, the focus of human capital data disclosure was just on diversity. But now it's expanded to include attrition, pay equity, leadership trust. So we're starting to see ESG reporting picking up speed. So in other words, a good work culture, it's just good for business.
I love the way you said that. That is so true. And I love what you said about ESG as well. That's such a rising topic. And we'll talk about some more of the trends in a couple of minutes. But Carl, I know you're dying to weigh in on this because you are a person who understands inherently the value of getting this right. So what comes up as we were having this discussion with Sofia?
Yeah, first of all, I loved it. So I was listening as a willing participant in this podcast and fascinated, really as almost akin to being one of the audience members. And really what jumped out to me was just the depth and breadth and the wealth of the insights that both of you were just providing. So here's what came up for me. If I were, for any of the other listeners right now, I would actually go back and listen through to any of the points raised, but certainly the ones that Sofia just beautifully itemized. And I would make a note of the various indicators, the 4 things, and then the 3 follow-up points, et cetera. I would make a note of them. And then the first thing I would do is ask yourself, how is it that you evidence living these things, bringing them into existence, et cetera? And the reason I point that out is because I found while I was listening, it was so easy for me to imagine myself on the receiving end of any number of instances where those things were not present. And I think that's often a commonplace occurrence where we listen to these insights, we listen to what the research has to say, and we say, you know what? I get that. That resonates. I can relate to that. But it's not as commonplace for us to pause and say, okay, with that in mind, what am I doing about it? So if I were to start with myself, which of course the leader in me will always do, because as we said earlier, you really only control yourself when all is said and done. So how do I evidence support? How do I evidence that I care about others? How do I co-create challenges that can help people really come to believe and see the best in themselves, et cetera? And so the list goes. So I would just make a point, Chris, that if you really want to itemize some of those things, yes, see what it's like to be on the receiving end of them so that you can promote a higher level of awareness, but then use that awareness to make sure that you practice otherwise. Meaning if it's not what it could be, give some thought to how to make it just that much better today than it was yesterday, and then do your part to make it so. And of course, if it is already clicking on all of those cylinders, then again, do your part to make sure that we sustain accordingly.
Here's the next question. And I'm going to start with, I'll start with Sofia again. I'm going to go dark for a second. The things that you read in the news and on LinkedIn hint at the fact that economic forces like a recession are swinging the pendulum back to the employer. So for a couple of years now, employees have had a little bit more leverage. They had a little bit more selling power. They could command higher prices. They could be selective about their places of work. But now the people are somewhat forced back into more traditional roles and traditional arrangements. It sounds like some employers are starting to see that as a return to quote unquote normal, and they're rubbing their hands together a little bit saying, oh, thank goodness that's over. I think that's the wrong attitude for an employer to take. And in my experience, really big pendulums of social change never fully swing back to the way they used to be. There's some things that once we've lifted the curtain can never be unseen. That's part one of the question. And the second part, Sofia, is why is it so hard for us to do what's right and to do what's best?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think you're right. Headlines have turned to recession fears, with some organizations thinking the leverage has swung back in their favor. But I don't think a cooler economy will necessarily stifle turnover or bring in the skills that are in line with what a lot of organizations need. And the old playbook for managing headcount through a downturn just won't cut it. I think that a lot of the headlines right now are focused mostly on tech companies where through the pandemic headcount grew and many companies put golden handcuffs on their talent to provoke poaching. In some cases, hiring grew out of control, actually. And of course, remote work has opened up global talent pools, allowing to save costs. But let me give you some more interesting statistics, some very recent statistics. PwC's recent CEO annual global survey revealed that CEOs see the need for long-term transformation and reinvention, but they also see the danger of being distracted by short-term waves. It also revealed that CEOs are cutting costs, but not necessarily people. Only 16% of CEOs globally indicated they were currently reducing the size of their workforce as they expect attrition to either stay the same or increase. So they need to maintain their investment in people despite the acute near-term cost pressures. Some other recent and interesting statistics. On December 2nd, Statistics Canada released its monthly labor force characteristics, showing that Canada's unemployment rate fell from 5.2 to 5.1%. And according to a survey conducted by Robert Half in the same time period, 50% of professionals in Canada are currently looking or planning to look for a new role in the first half of 2023. And that's up from 31% just 6 months ago. So even with a looming recession, it seems that companies are still under threat of great employees leaving because workers still have confidence in the market, irrespective of layoffs. In light of the economic pressures, every choice a company makes today should consider the fact that on average, a recession lasts 12 to 15 months. And today's choices may have either a positive or negative outcome on how you recover when the business cycle inevitably flips back to growth mode. So it's important to be recession ready by having an effective people strategy based on data. And this is where people analytics and insights can play a critical role. But it's also important to take into consideration the impact, burden, and toll that layoffs leave on the remaining employees and ensure that there's an environment in place to inspire and retain them. Progressive thinking organizations understand that there'll always be options for in-demand talent that can be scooped up by more nurturing cultures or more fulfilling work, better salaries, benefits, and perks. Why is it so hard to make the shift to this kind of employee centricity focal point? I think there are various factors. Some companies see and treat employees as a resource or cost, even though they speak to people being their greatest asset, which should be based on an investment focus. Well, we see shareholder pressures and expectations on the bottom line, and that creates a short-term focus, limited resources, limited budgets. And I think that management has used efficiency as a proxy for effectiveness in the workplace for decades. Efficiency prioritizes time and dollars, increasing output and minimizing costs. And while this mindset can support short-term profit, effectiveness is a more meaningful measure that drives long-term company growth. At its core, effectiveness is rooted in understanding employees, how they align to the business goal, and how effective they are being with their efforts towards meeting them. For example, an organization can decide to outsource a function to derive lower cost and potentially an experience of lower service, or it can strategize to use training and development to improve the productivity of employees based on data, which is an effectiveness strategy.
Thanks, Sophia. There's a couple of things that you said in there that are really important, but the one that I caught that really engaged me is that you might think as a leader that things are going back to the way that they were. But if you fail to heed the lessons that we've learned in the past 3 years, shame on you, and you're probably going to burn for it. Your best people are not going to forget. Carl, what do you think? Why is this so hard? You're a person whom I respect above all else because you're a perfect blend of the why and the how. Why is it so hard to get the why right and to get the how right of treating people the way we want to treat them and putting the focus on the individual?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's something that many of the listeners, and thank you for that, Chris. There's a number of listeners who have heard of the concept of the golden rule, treat others as you would like to be treated. But of course, if you're a particularly edgy person, then in the business world, that's likely not going to work for many. And so there's something instead called the platinum rule for fun, which says do unto others as you perceive they need done unto themselves. Well, that's really no different than suggesting that empathy is a cornerstone. It's an incredibly powerful skill, which requires, yes, put yourself in somebody else's shoes, but as them, not as yourself. And so what I would point out is many of us in the professional world would say we're very effective at empathizing, but in fact, we've practiced unconsciously, unwittingly, putting ourselves in somebody else's shoes, but as ourselves. That's why it's perhaps more effective to think of it as walk a mile in someone else's shoes. Well, of course, we hear about this all the time. And Sofia alluded to it earlier when we talk about client centricity or employee centricity. The point is, whether it's a client or whether it's a quote unquote employee, these are human beings. And the only way that I can be adept at adapting to what someone else needs is to know them as an individual, not just know about them, but to actually know them. What are their greatest strengths? What are their interests? Where would they like to see themselves in so many years? How is it that they're excited, or why is it that they're excited about helping us with the best of who they are move in the direction of the vision? And of course, the more I know about somebody in this regard, the greater my ability to adapt and co-create the kind of environment that's going to set them up for success. So then the bottom line is, how effectively do we actually know one another as individuals, as fellow human beings? And because we don't often know much about each other, quite frankly. So I had a leader the other day say to me, Carl, I've read a book called The 90-Day Plan, and I'm in a new leadership role. Do you have anything else to add about where I should focus? I now know what to do with the strategy. I know what to do with the problem resolution, with the gap analysis, with the SWOT analysis. And I smiled and I said, how well do you know the individuals that you have the privilege of leading going forward? And they said, I think most of the people know me quite well. And I said, well, that's not actually what I asked. I asked, how well do you know them as people, as individuals, as opposed to knowing about them vis-a-vis their roles or their educational background, et cetera? And they smiled and said, oh, well, I'm not sure I know them well at all. Okay, so that's like saying I don't know a client well at all, and yet somehow I'm supposed to be best positioned to service their needs. It's not going to happen. And as soon as you start treating people / employees / clients like things, like some means to my end, you relegate all of us to widget status. And so you heard Sofia very crisply and clearly suggest that if you're going to talk about team members as a cost, then just know they will perceive that they are treated like a thing instead of like the human being that they are, the individual that wants to bring their life force in service of your cause. And so be very mindful of that. And again, you also heard her say that if people really are your greatest asset, moreover, for many, you're actually a services business, then naturally your people are your greatest investment. Well, if that's true, then treat them like your greatest asset and investment. And so these are some of the things that you can see how they all coalesce and intertwine. And if we don't get the human side of this beingness right, then we're going to continue to just do what we've done, habits of old, patterns of old, and we won't actually morph into the more holistic, human-based, experiential co-creation that's actually going to have us wanting to stay. Sofia talked about the uptick in people that are looking to leave. That's because they don't feel a part of something. So if you don't feel felt, then you don't believe that anybody else really cares about your voice. And these are all of the different things that we can practice improving. And when you do, I'll end on this note, Chris and Sofia, we've often heard how the research says people quit people, they don't quit organizations. Now you know why. If I'm reporting into a Sofia or a Chris, and they've role modeled the very things we've been talking about, they seem to care about me through their words and their actions. I know they support me. They're interested in helping create a vision that's inspirational for all of us. And clearly we're serving a purpose that matters to both of us. What are the odds that I'm ever going to want to leave an experience like that, or an individual who helps co-create an experience like that? And I think we all know the answer is I wouldn't. But of course, if I don't have that, then you expose me to the marketplace, and I'll continue to seek out somebody who can actually role model more effectively, being the source of what I seek.
Now, there was something that came up there. I don't know if you all caught it, but first of all, it's back to everyone wants to feel beautiful, and beautiful includes not just heard and felt, but also belonging. And there's something that you said in there that was so very important, which is, a lot of Scrum Masters will ask this question. I'm new to the job. How do I get productive and effective? Sophia, you mentioned that effectiveness of a human being is so important at work for their own fulfillment and for their value to the org. So I always get the question, how do I get up and effective with my team as quickly as possible? And it's funny that you said this, Carl, that everyone wants to talk about the process. Here's the step, and here's the 90-day plan, and here's this, that, and the other thing. And the process matters less than reaching out to another human being and saying, what is it that your family knows about you, but people at work don't know about you? What do you do when the 5 o'clock bells or 6 o'clock bells, or whenever you quit work at the end of the day? What is it that you do that lights you up, that energizes you, that fuels you? And the answer can be anything. You'll get people saying it's my family. Some people, you won't know this, but I used to be a professional baseball player. Really? So not only do you invest time in letting people know that you care through your actions, but you also build an inventory of how to communicate with that person. Hey, Carl, I bet this is just like any time in baseball when someone takes too big of a lead, they're trying to steal second, and they get caught and they get thrown out. Feels like that, doesn't it? You know what I mean? You've got metaphor and you've got story that you can use to continue to relate and build bonds with people. And that's so critical, and a lot of leaders miss it. So if you want to know how do you get started with people, how do you build trust with people, be curious and ask great questions.
I mean, at the end of the day, Chris, can I just say, I loved how you just recap that. And I would put it this way, just to punctuate it. How in the world can you effectively empathize with someone who you don't know?
Bingo. You got it. You got it. So let's talk about not knowing someone. One thing that's coming up a lot, and I love to talk about it, is artificial intelligence. Everyone's all over ChatGPT right now. And there's two camps. We're either terrified of it and will this eliminate all of our jobs? Kind of like we used to think back in the 1980s when everyone said robots were going to steal all of our jobs. And it never really happened. But it did change the landscape. And then there's the other camp that's like, let me embrace this. Let me use this to optimize my time and what I can deliver. And so I can focus on the higher value virtues like creativity or ingenuity and innovation, the things that you can't replicate. I can spend more time on those and less time writing emails. So my question to you both is, and just real quick, what's your take on it? What are the potential impacts we need to think about? And Sophia, specifically for you, what do leaders need to be saying to their people right now?
Yeah, sure. I think that we're seeing increased automation and AI already starting to change work. And certainly, AI is going to have a profound impact on shaping the future of work. But to your point, it's a lot of what Carl said. We can't lose sight of the characteristics that make humans different to AI and those attributes that make us irreplaceable. Carl talked about empathy, showing care, creativity, interpersonal skills. After all, Alexa or Siri are great at following your commands, but they're not going to be so great at understanding how you're feeling. She would never be a great manager to help you through a difficult time or to build a quality relationship with a client. I think that in the short term, we have a great opportunity to leverage AI to allow us to evolve our work by automating some of that lower level tedious stuff so that we can take on more rewarding and fulfilling work, as you say. And I think that employees, those that will flourish, will be the ones that will learn how to work with AI. And I guess the advice I would have for leaders in terms of responding to the employee fear of AI eliminating jobs is be transparent about the company's plan for using AI, including how it will be used, its benefits, how it will impact employees. Encourage open dialogue and feedback. Create forums to discuss the topic, answer questions directly, and include employees in the scoping and testing of AI projects early on. Provide training on AI and its potential impact on jobs so that employees can build the skills to understand and work with the technology. And probably most importantly, I would say continuously invest in more broad upskilling and reskilling and career development programs so that employees have multiple career path options in the event that they may be displaced by AI technology.
I love what you said there, because really this is no different. When you look at it that way, it's no different than a spreadsheet. This is a tool that we use every day. Some would argue we use it too often, but it's just a piece of technology to help you get your work done. In that case, it's organizing big quantities of data. In this case, it's taking over some of the mundane yet difficult tasks of simple communications, questions and answers. You know, you can go into ChatGPT and you can say, hey, I'm feeling a little down today. What should I do? And it'll give you an answer. But that doesn't mean it replaces that invisible connection that makes a manager or a leader's ears tune up when we sense that somebody in our tribe, our crew is hurting. You know what I'm saying? That thing that we can't measure, the thing that we can't see, it doesn't exist in the airwaves. You can't really detect it, but we know it's there. And that's the part that would be impossible to replace. So I think my view on this is don't run from the technology. It's the worst thing you can do. Let's learn how to master the tech and get it to work for us. And when you look at it that way, it can never threaten your job, so long as you take the responsibility and care to embrace it and embrace it properly. Carl, what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I love it. And I would just summarize what I've heard from you and Sofia by saying, also practice, and I use the word practice a lot because the bridge from theory to mastery is practice. Practice bringing a possibility orientation, a possibility lens to this, as opposed to a fear-based paradigm. And there's a practical insight where that's concerned as well. You heard Sofia really help inform us earlier about the tribal side of things and the evolutionary side of things, et cetera. Well, as it turns out, when you are afraid of something, it actually shuts down your ability to access the best of your creativity and your imagination, et cetera. So employing a fear-based paradigm is really going to be counterproductive and not allow us to access our human intelligence that we need at its best in order to program the artificial intelligence in a way that it can continue to serve our needs and help us where, quite frankly, more of the mundane things that we would rather do less of can be looked after and allow us to expand and to grow and to learn accordingly. So yeah, I would just say practice being a possibility thinker, give some thought to how this can work with us, for us, as opposed to against us. But I don't want to sound naive either, in the sense that if you are somebody listening and you have a fear where it's concerned, respect that fear, make a note of it. And then what I want you to do is think creatively and constructively about what is it that I can do with this in mind that can make this moment just a little better than otherwise. So we're not suggesting suppress any fears, but we are saying be action oriented around them and practice being a possibility thinker where this is concerned.
And be irreplaceable. I always encourage people, when I'm trying to find people who coach what I coach and maybe rise up as leaders in the Forge, I frequently hear people say, I can't do what you do, which is not true. You just need to learn the interesting parts of what I do in order to do it. But one thing I know for sure is it'll be a while before a computer can replace that. That's intentional. I chose to develop the skills that are hard to get, hard to find, and therefore easy to develop leverage and advantage with. That makes perfect sense. And so I would say to every single person as well who's thinking that this will replace their job is find new and creative ways to be irreplaceable and use that technology to help you.
Chris, can I just add something to what you just said?
Mm-hmm.
I think most people, when they hear that, and I loved it, by the way, I think most people, when they hear it, they think about becoming irreplaceable from a task orientation point of view, a skills-based point of view. In other words, I'm so good at my particular craft that I'm irreplaceable. And I just want to add to that and say, yes, and you can also, I just want everybody to realize in and of yourself, you really are irreplaceable. You cannot be substituted for. We always talk about how relationships are everything. Well, guess what? If you leave your role tomorrow, I can hire somebody else to take on the tasks that you are responsible for. But the one thing I can't substitute for is you. I can't substitute for all of the amazing relationships you have and the history you have and the continuity that those relationships and that history provides, et cetera. And I just would love to see, quote unquote, employers come to appreciate and respect that more and more and more as we foray into co-creating the kind of future that we want, where you really treat one another with the kind of reverence and respect that appreciates the fact that I literally, if I lose you, basically change one thing, you change everything. We've now changed the formula because the relationship that was you is no longer available to us. So do trust that and respect that and honor that within yourself as well.
I'm glad you added that because that's an excellent point of clarity. I want to finish up with one final question. What is the takeaway? Let's reward the people who've hung with us for this long. What advice would you give to organizations who are looking to set up a flourishing future for the company, but most importantly, for the people within it? Carl?
I mean, I'll be brief on this one. I would just say connection over perfection. So rather than be immobilized or paralyzed by virtue of trying to get everything perfect before we're willing to take the next step, just recognize what you said earlier on, Chris, which is connection is everything. And don't confuse being connected with having established connection. So if the individuals around us don't actually feel that you care, that you support them, that you believe in them, that you respect them, that you want them on the team, that you enjoy celebrating them, and that together we're better. It's us against the issue, never against each other. And synergy is a real thing as a byproduct of that. In other words, 1 + 1 really can equal 3, as opposed to if we don't bring more intention to our attention where these things are concerned, i.e., making choices that align with our mission more consciously, role modeling what our values look like in action when we're at our best, and marching towards a vision that is actually inspiring towards us. Start with ourselves. How do we make sure that we are response able and doing our part to bring our best, and at the same time making sure that we're the source of what we seek? So to evidence the very thing that we're hoping to receive and make sure we're the source of that for everyone else that we connect with. And in so doing, you will create a deeper level of connection. And I think that's going to win the day for people more often than not.
Sofia, my friend, I am dying to hear what you have to contribute here. I know that anything that you say will be not only inspiring to the people who are listening, but I think it will be wisdom rooted in great experience and great intention. Your leadership is such an inspiration to me, and I know it will be to everyone listening. So how would you conclude here? What advice would you give?
Yeah, I think I will double down on a lot of what Carl has already said. I think that if I pull back the lens, I think that the last several years have taught us that the challenge we face ahead are truly unpredictable. And I think that some organizations will be tempted to hold back, see whether or not the economic issues may cause some easing in the tight labor market, and just let some of the workplace issues coast for a while. In my experience, this is a huge mistake. I think that acting now will pay dividends. So my advice is very similar to Carl's. Number one, know your people. Leverage people analytics to truly understand your people, their needs and wants, and then find the sweet spot in marrying those needs with your business transformations. Number two, care for your people. Cultivate compassionate leaders for today and tomorrow who invest in those deep relationships with their people, empower them in their work, create an environment of psychological safety and trust, and support their well-being. This is key to a resilient and innovative culture. And number three, grow your people. You're just not going to be able to hire your way out of the skill shortage. So invest in upskilling and reskilling as strategies to attract and retain talent and build new organizational capabilities.
And I'm going to echo the last item is something that Carl already said, but do something, right? Your uncertainty that you have a solution to this problem must not stop you from acting, because people are watching you. As a leader, they're counting on you in times of uncertainty, not to have certainty, but to be certainty. Certain of what? Certain that I will act and I will learn, even if I don't know. That's perhaps the most important and compelling thing that you can do as a leader today. My friends, thank you so much. This was a wonderful conversation. And I hope it adds a ton of value to anyone out there who is hoping to lead and act like a hero and become the change that they know the organization needs, to become the change that they would really love to see. Listen to this advice and then listen to it again. There's so much gold in the words of these two professionals whom I admire so much. My friends, Carl and Sofia, thank you so much for being on this show.
It was a pleasure.
Real pleasure. Thanks, you too.